the universe is bigger than we think, and we are not alone. If you're ready, we're heading beyond the galaxy. Welcome to Stolleralian, where every story begins in silence and ends among the stars.
The night felt strangely paused, as if the city had taken a breath and forgotten to let it go. I was halfway through convincing myself that I should definitely not be walking through an empty park at this hour when I saw her, sitting alone on a bench, shoulders trembling, head lowered, like someone who had misplaced not just a thought but an entire world. I slowed down. Not stopped, just slowed, like a person pretending not to stare while very obviously staring. She looked human at first glance. That was the problem. Nothing in this city was ever that simple. Still, crying was crying, and ignoring it felt like the kind of decision that would haunt me later in a very specific, inconvenient way. "Hey," I said, immediately regretting how small my voice sounded. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond right away. For a moment, I considered that she might not speak the language, or worse, that she might be one of those people who simply didn't believe in answering strangers. Then she lifted her head slightly, just enough for the dim light to reach her face, and that's when I noticed her ears. Long, smooth, not exaggerated, not theatrical, just wrong in a way that felt carefully intentional. I blinked. Once, twice. I briefly considered that I might be more tired than I thought, or that I had finally reached the stage of life where hallucinations begin politely. "You are a tempting comfort," she said, her voice soft but oddly precise, like each word had been measured before release. Yes," I replied. "That's usually how this starts." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a theory. "Your tone suggests uncertainty." "Well, yeah. I don't usually open with emotional support in dark parks." I was aiming for casual concern, not a full counseling session. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, she shifted slightly to make space beside her. An invitation, or a trap. Honestly, both seemed equally possible at this point. I sat down, keeping what I hoped was a respectful but not suspicious distance. Up close, she looked even more human, which somehow made the differences more unsettling. Her eyes held something distant, like they were focused on a place that no longer existed. "You are not leaving," she observed. "I thought about it," I admitted. Briefly. But then I imagined explaining to myself later why I walked away from a crying person. Didn't like how that conversation went. Another pause, then very faintly the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something close enough to count. "That is inefficient logic," she said. "Story of my life." She looked at her hands, fingers tightening slightly. "I am experiencing loss," she said, "but not in a way your kind typically defines it." "Okay," I said carefully. "That sounds complicated." "It is absence," she continued. "A silence where there was once everything." I nodded, even though I had absolutely no idea what that meant. "Yeah, I've had bad days too. Not everything vanished into cosmic silence bad, but close." She turned her head, studying me with a focus that made me suddenly aware of how little sense I probably made. "You respond to discomfort with humor. It's either that or panic," I said, "and panic is terrible for first impressions." For a moment, the silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt shared. Then she asked, almost curiously, "Is this what your species does? Sit with strangers and attempt to reduce their distress with inadequate verbal strategies?" I let out a quiet breath. "On a good day, yeah, that's pretty much our peak performance." She considered that. Then, slowly, she nodded again, as if marking it as useful data. And for some reason I couldn't explain, I stayed. She remained quiet for a while after that, as if my presence required processing power she wasn't entirely willing to spend. I shifted slightly on the bench, immediately aware that every small movement I made seemed to register with her like a system notification. "So," I said, "because silence and I have a complicated relationship. Do you have a name, or is that one of those things I have to unlock later?" She turned her head toward me again. "I do," she said, "but it does not translate efficiently into your phonetic system." "Great," I nodded. "We're already off to a strong start." She studied me for a second longer, then added, "You may assign a temporary designation." I blinked. "You're letting me name you." "It is a practical shortcut. That feels like a lot of responsibility for someone who once named a pet rock captain." Another pause. I could almost hear the internal recalculation. Captain, she repeated slowly, as if testing the word for structural integrity. Don't worry about it, I said quickly. Okay, how about Lena? Simple, human, low risk of intergalactic offense. Lena, she echoed, then gave a small nod. Acceptable. Good, that makes this less weird. It does not, she said calmly. Fair. The air settled again, but this time it felt less like a barrier, and more like something we were both leaning against. I glanced at her hands again, still tense, still holding onto something invisible. You said its absence, I said. What does that actually mean? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lifted her gaze toward the sky, though there was nothing visible beyond the dull haze of city light. My species does not exist as isolated minds, she said. We are connected, continuously. Thought, memory, awareness shared. I frowned, like a network. Yes, like Wi-Fi but for brains. She turned to me again, eyes narrowing slightly. Your comparison is reductive. I'm working with what I've got. There was a brief pause, and then unexpectedly. It is not entirely inaccurate. I sat up a little. Wow, first alien approval, I'm framing that. She ignored that. Imagine, she continued, never being alone in your own mind. Every thought accompanied, every silence filled. I let that sit for a moment. That sounds intense. It is normal, she said, or it was. Something in her voice shifted on that last word, subtle but heavy. And now, I asked, now there is nothing. The way she said it made the space around us feel thinner. They're gone, I said quietly. She shook her head just slightly. Not gone, severed. Okay, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. That's slightly better, maybe. It is not. Right, of course it's not. I exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of my neck. So you're basically disconnected from your entire species. Yes, and you ended up here. Yes. I looked around the empty park, the flickering lights, the very unimpressive bench we were sitting on. No offense, I said, but that feels like a downgrade. She tilted her head. Explain. Well, if I lost my entire cosmic brain network, I'd at least hope to land somewhere cooler. Maybe a beach, or a place with better lighting. She considered that for a moment. This location was not selected for aesthetic value. Yeah, that tracks. Another small silence passed, but this one felt different. Lighter, somehow, like the weight of what she had said had settled just enough for something else to exist beside it. You are continuing to use humor, she noted. Still better than panicking. Panic would be a more logical response. Yeah, I said, glancing at her. But then I'd probably run away, and I get the feeling that wouldn't be very helpful right now. She watched me for a long moment, something unreadable behind her expression. Then, very quietly, she said, no, it would not. And for the first time since I'd found her, the silence that followed didn't feel like loss. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us fully understood yet, but neither of us was walking away from. We sat there long enough for time to stop feeling like something measured and start feeling like something shared. I don't know when I stopped thinking of her as something impossible and started thinking of her as someone who just needed me to stay. So, I said eventually, you lost your entire cosmic group chat. That's bad. But I feel like there's a bigger, but coming. She looked at me, and this time there was no delay. There is. Of course there is, I muttered. There's always a but. That's how the universe keeps things interesting. Her gaze held steady. Before the severance, there was a realization. I leaned back slightly. That already sounds like trouble. It was, she said. We discovered that consciousness is not an emergent property. It is a field. I blinked, like gravity. Yes. Okay, I nodded slowly. I'm going to pretend I fully understand that and not panic. It means, she continued, that every thinking being contributes to it. Your species, mine, others. Great, I said. So we're all part of some giant cosmic brain. That's comforting, in a mildly terrifying way. It becomes unstable, she said quietly, when too many minds reach the same threshold of awareness. I frowned. Threshold of what exactly? Understanding. The word hung there, heavier than anything she'd said before. And your species reached it, I said. Yes. And then what? System crash. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer than I'd heard it yet. They chose to disconnect. I stared at her. Chose. They believed that continuing to exist within the field would propagate the realization. Propagate what? She met my eyes. That the field is not passive. It observes itself through us. I let out a slow breath. So, we're not just thinking, something is thinking through us. Yes. Yeah, I said, rubbing my face. That's a lot for a Tuesday night. She watched me carefully. This is why you were not ready. Hey, I said, holding up a hand. To be fair, I wasn't ready for any of this. I was on my way home. I had plans. They involved not discussing the nature of universal consciousness with someone who technically shouldn't exist. A pause, then unexpectedly she asked, "What were your plans?" I hesitated. Leftover food, maybe a bad movie. She considered that. Those seem insufficient. They were, I admitted, but they were mine. Something shifted in her expression again. Not grief this time, something quieter. You remain, she said. Yeah, I shrugged. Turns out I'm stubborn. Also, leaving you alone after all this would feel wrong. Even knowing what is coming. I looked at her. What is coming? She was silent for a moment, then said, Your species is approaching the same threshold. I exhaled slowly. Of course we are. We can't even approach things normally, can we? Always has to be existential. You may still choose, she said, as we did. Disconnect from the cosmic field, I said. Or what? Stay and face whatever that realization does. Yes. I let that sit, the weight of it pressing in from all sides. Then I laughed. Not loudly, not uncontrollably, just enough to break the tension. You know, I said, a few hours ago, my biggest concern was whether I'd remembered to lock my door. That concern is no longer relevant. Yeah, I nodded. Perspective shift. I looked at her again, really looked this time. Not as something unknown, but as someone who had carried something unbearable and still sat here, still chose to speak. You stayed disconnected, I said. Why? For this, she answered simply, to tell you. I swallowed, the humor fading just enough to let something else take its place. That's a lot of pressure. Yes. Good thing, I said, taking a slow breath. I'm already bad at making small decisions. Might as well go big. She tilted her head slightly. You are not afraid. Oh, I am, I said, just not enough to walk away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Not empty, not heavy, just open. Then very quietly she said, Then you are already changing. I smiled faintly. Yeah, don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain. And somehow, in the middle of everything we didn't understand, that felt like enough to begin. We didn't move right away after that. It felt like moving would confirm something neither of us was ready to confirm. Eventually, though, I stood up, mostly because my legs had gone numb, and I refused to let first contact with cosmic truth end with me collapsing off a bench. So, I said, stretching slightly, what happens now? Do we wait for the universe to think harder at us? Lena stood as well, smoother than any human movement had a right to be. The process is already occurring, she said. Awareness does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates. Great, I nodded. So humanity is slowly walking toward an existential cliff without realizing it. Classic. She looked at me, and for once, there was something almost like concern in her expression. You are still using humor. Yeah, I said. It's either that or scream into the void, and I feel like the void might answer now. That is possible. I paused. Okay, that was not comforting. We started walking without really deciding to. The park didn't feel the same anymore. Or maybe I didn't. Every light, every shadow felt like part of something larger, something quietly observing. So your people disconnected to avoid spreading this realization, I said. But you stayed to tell us. That seems contradictory. It is, she admitted. But isolation did not resolve the awareness. It only delayed it. And you think telling us will? No, she said, but it allows you to choose consciously. I let out a breath. You really like that word, choose. It defines your species, she said. I glanced at her. You've known me for, what, an hour? And yet you stayed, she replied. I didn't have a comeback for that. We reached the edge of the park, where the city slowly started pretending to be alive again. A car passed. Somewhere someone laughed. Normal things, small things. They felt different now, not meaningless, but connected in a way I hadn't noticed before. Okay, I said, stopping. Let's say we reach this threshold. Best case scenario, what happens? She considered the question carefully. You understand your place within the field, you perceive the observer. And worst case, you understand your place within the field, she said again. Ah, I nodded. So either way, we get our minds blown. Fantastic. There was a brief silence, then I added, do we at least get time to adjust? Or is it like, boom, cosmic enlightenment, no refunds? It varies. Of course it does. I looked up at the sky, though it looked exactly the same as it always had. That was the strange part. Everything still looked normal. The world hadn't changed. I had. I used to think the universe was just there, I said. Big empty, not really paying attention. It is not empty, she said. Yeah, I nodded. I'm starting to get that. I glanced at her again. What about you? What about me? You told me you did your part. Do you stay here? Keep watching. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I do not know, she said. That's new, I smiled slightly. I thought you had everything figured out. I lost everything I was connected to, she replied. Uncertainty is unfamiliar. Welcome to being human, I said. We run on uncertainty. It's kind of our thing. For the first time, she gave something that was unmistakably a smile. Small, but real. That may be why you succeed, she said. Or why we constantly trip over ourselves, I added. That also. Another silence, but this one felt lighter. Not empty, not heavy, just open. I took a step back. Well, I said, I guess this is where I go back to my incredibly important plans. The food and the visual media, she said. Exactly, I nodded. Can't abandon tradition now. The fate of humanity might depend on it. That seems unlikely. Hey, you don't know that. Maybe the key to handling cosmic awareness is a decent meal and a terrible movie. She tilted her head slightly. I would like to observe this process. I blinked. You want to come with me? Yes. I hesitated for half a second, then shrugged. Sure, but I'm warning you, my definition of decent is questionable. I will adapt, she said. We started walking again, this time not because we didn't know what to do, but because we did. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a grand decision about the future of consciousness, but it was a choice. And for the first time, that felt like enough.